day, distinguished guests, panelists, and colleagues. My name is Agron Pali, and on behalf of the Global Monitoring Center, I would like to welcome you to today's conference titled Western Sahara, the Autonomy Proposal versus International Legal Obligations. Thank you all for taking the time to join us for this important and timely discussion. Today's conference will examine Morocco's autonomy proposal concerning Western Sahara through the lens of international law and established legal principles, including the right to self-determination and the obligations of states under the United Nations Charter. Western Sahara remains listed by the United Nations as a non-self-governing territory, and the question of how the right to self-determination should be implemented continues to be a matter of international attention and diplomatic engagement. Our objective today is to examine the autonomy proposal in relation to established principles of international law and to consider its implications for the right to self-determination and the broader international legal framework. Before we begin, I would like to briefly outline how today's conference will proceed. We will begin with three presentations from our invited speakers, Professor Stephen Zunes, Ms. Caitlin Thomas, and Ambassador Sidi Omar. We will now move to our final speaker, Ambassador Sidi Omar, Frente Polisario representative at the United Nations and coordinator with MINURSO. He holds a doctorate in peace and conflict studies and has long engaged in diplomatic efforts advocating for the Sahrawi people's right to self-determination and a UN-mandated referendum in accordance with international law. His presentation today is titled Morocco's Proposal, a maneuver to undermine the inalienable right of the Sahrawi people to self-determination. Ambassador Omar, it is a privilege to have you here with us today. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much again, and many thanks to the Global Monitoring Center for your interest and advocacy for West Sahara, and many thanks to you, Agron, for your being always on the right side of history. Let me stress at the beginning that addressing the Moroccan autonomy proposal is not motivated by any particular interest in what we have already unofficially described as a travesty. It's mainly because, all sorts of reasons, it has become part of the political and media discourse nowadays. And even the Security Council, in its latest resolution 2797, says in a preamble paragraph that it, and I quote, takes note of the support expressed by many member states for Morocco's autonomy proposal presented on 11th April 2007 to the Secretary General, unquote. And in this context, we have heard several governments praise this proposal using all sorts of attributes and describing it as credible, realistic, pragmatic, or even the most serious basis for resolving a conflict in Western Sahara. Now, with all this in mind, I will address certain points related to this proposal to demonstrate, again, that this proposal is no more than a travesty and a typical colonial maneuver, and therefore it cannot be described as serious or credible, let alone a viable basis for resolving the decolonization issue of Western Sahara. Obviously, and as the two speakers have brilliantly highlighted, any legal analysis of this proposal would clearly demonstrate that Morocco cannot grant any type of autonomy or territorial arrangement to Western Sahara simply because it does not have any United Nations recognized sovereignty over the territory. And in this context, of course, we can recall the advisory opinion of the International Court, the Legal Council legal opinion in 2002, and so on and so forth, which all make the point that Morocco doesn't have any sovereignty in Western Sahara. Moreover, this proposal cannot serve as the basis, let alone the only basis, for a just and lasting solution consistent with the UN Charter and relevant resolution of the United Nations on decolonization for at least three additional reasons. First, this proposal undermines the inalienable right of the Sahrawi people to self-determination by predetermining the outcome and limiting it only to autonomy. And as we know, self-determination in essence means a free choice, and a free choice can only be made among several options. Two, this proposal excludes the option of independence, which is what the Sahrawi people, that by the Frente POLISARIO, have been struggling for since the beginning of their resistance against Spanish colonial rule and the Moroccan occupation that took place after that. Third, this proposal is extremely dangerous because it would reward Morocco for its unlawful use of force to occupy a territory which is on the United Nations agenda as a decolonization issue. And as the two speakers have already mentioned, the consequences, the repercussions of such a proposal on other parts of the world, particularly in our case, in Africa. So despite all these issues and other political considerations of great importance, I would like now to highlight just three fundamental limitations of this proposal from the conflict resolution perspective to illustrate, for the sake of argument, whether this proposal could be a basis for resolving the long-standing conflict in Western Sahara. First, in all 35 paragraphs of this proposal, the Frente POLISARIO, the sole legitimate representative of the people of Western Sahara as recognized by the United Nations, is not mentioned even once. Throughout this proposal, reference is made to other parties, in plural, the other parties, without obviously naming those parties, but in general, there is no mention of the Frente POLISARIO. And the question is this: if there is no other recognized and identifiable party to this conflict, and therefore the conflict to begin with, then the question again is this: with whom is this proposal is intended to be discussed and agreed upon? Second, the proposal speaks once of self-determination in paragraph 27, again in paragraph 8, but it does not speak of the people of Western Sahara are the beneficiary of the mutually acceptable political solution, and even of this autonomy were to be accepted by them. Instead, the proposal speaks of population of the region, all Sahara tribes, and population of the Sahara, which, as we know, all are demographic terms referring to the inhabitants, but not to the people as a political entity entitled to a right to self-determination under international law. Third, according to this proposal, paragraph 27 again, the autonomy proposal would be submitted to free consultation by a referendum of the population concerned. Although it's not clear what this referendum would be about, but it raises a fundamental question regarding the position that Morocco has already all along taken on, describing the United Nations sponsored referendum as impracticable and even obsolete. The question is this: then what makes this referendum more practical and up-to-date than the United Nations referendum? Well, in my opinion, perhaps the only difference between the United Nations sponsored referendum and the referendum envisaged in Morocco's proposal is that the UN referendum would give the Sahrawis the choice between independence and integration, while the Moroccan proposal would give them the choice between integration and integration. And you can see how absurd this sounds. In short, what Morocco proposes is to negotiate a proposal with a party that it does not recognize in order to grant autonomy to the people that it does not recognize. And you can understand how absurd this proposal is. This is why we have described it as a travesty, because in reality, what Morocco wants is to legitimize its illegal occupation and annexation of Western Sahara through a process that's nothing but a mockery of everything that the United Nations Charter and the right to self-determination stand for. Now, these 3 points that I have just underlined demonstrate very clearly that the Moroccan proposal, in addition to being inadmissible from the legal standpoint, is not serious or credible, let alone being a just and legally based and sustainable solution to this conflict. And this is why, in addition to the legal consideration outlined above, the Frente Polisario and the Sahrawi people have rejected this proposal, of which illegal nature exposes the indefensible positions of all those governments and experts, quote unquote, who have miraculously seen any merit in this proposal. And in reality, it's really ironic to hear liberal democracies describe this illegal and undemocratic proposal as something serious and credible. Now, again, for the sake of argument, one may ask, is autonomy as a territorial arrangement a feasible option under Morocco's ruling regime? The answer is a big no. Morocco, as it has been highlighted, is an absolute monarchy, an authoritarian regime that have no stomach, so to speak, for such kind of territorial arrangements that can only thrive in democratic countries. And as its record shows, Morocco's ruling regime is incompatible with democracy as we know it. Now, the two major autonomy experiences in Africa that have been referred to, namely the short-lived autonomy regimes in Eritrea from 62 to 62, and 52 to 62, and South Sudan from 72 to 83 are instructive in this regard. The lessons learned from these failed autonomy regimes in Africa have a common denominator. Autonomy regimes enacted under undemocratic centralist systems are short-lived and inherently doomed to failure. In other words, mainly because of the undemocratic nature of the political systems and governing structures under which these regimes were enacted, the two autonomy experiences in Africa carried the seeds of their own destruction from the start, and their failure resulted in the loss of many human lives, wars, and large-scale insecurity and instability. And therein lie very important lessons that no one can ignore when it comes to the Morocco's autonomy proposal. Thank you very much.
Omar, would you
Sure.
like to add to that?
See, just on this point, and let's be very clear here. As I said before, and the speakers have said that very clearly, we're talking about a territory of which international status is well defined. By whom? By the United Nations and its own charter, which is the supreme constitution of the world in which we live. So this is not the question that's been posed now. If we were talking about whether it is viable to grant autonomy to Casablanca region in Morocco proper or Rif region, we could, continue the argument and very clearly say that no, under the current ruling regime in Morocco, with the unlimited power of the king, no viable autonomy is a conceivable autonomy granted to Casablanca region. The question of Western Sahara is completely different. This is a distinct and separate territory that does not form part of Morocco within its internationally recognized borders. So just to make this point very clear, and as I said in my statement, I used for the sake of argument, just to clarify my point. But we're talking about a very basic issue. Morocco doesn't have sovereignty of Western Sahara, and it has never happened since the establishment of the United Nations, as Professor Zuns has said, that an autonomy has been granted by a country to a non-self-governing territory over which that country doesn't have a sovereignty. It has never happened.
Thank you.
Indeed, there is a possibility to achieve a framework agreement or any basis for agreement if there is political will on Morocco's side in this case, because of the broken promises that have already been mentioned. The problem now is whether we're looking to the issue from a realpolitik perspective and thinking that what is possible is what is there. Morocco has been occupying the territory for 50 years, trying to entrench the fait accompli, and is accumulating political statements by mighty powers, giving them the title of ownership of Western Sahara. But this will not resolve this issue. Only a negotiated and a mutually acceptable solution will lead us to the solution. Because Morocco can continue accumulating political statements, most of which was coming from Finland. But this all shows that they do not have any political will to really reach a peaceful and just solution. What they seek is to legitimize this state of affairs, which is not legal. The US could give them the title of ownership, which is, in a way ironic because Morocco claims to be the first country to recognize the United States. But it seems that it took the US all these decades to really realize that Western Sahara, quote unquote, is Morocco in this sense, which is totally absurd. So we're back to the question. Yes, it is possible to reach a mutually acceptable political solution to this long-standing conflict. The position of the Frente POLISARIO is very clear. We have made all sorts of concessions to reach peace because we believe in peace. We believe in the need for a peaceful and mutually acceptable political solution. Morocco is our neighbor in geography. You can change your friends and allies, but not in geography. But the problem nowadays is that Morocco is emboldened by these kind of political statements, and they think that they can finish this issue within even days or months under the current US administration. At the end of the day, we all know that 50 years of conflict has not led us anywhere, and the only viable way is to sit down, negotiate, and make those difficult decisions, but for a greater good, which is the peace. The Frente Polisario is ready to do so. The Sahrawi people is ready to do so. The problem lies on the other side.
Very well said, Ambassador. Thank you so much for that insightful information.